Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I am just returning from a trip to Italy and Greece. It was fantastic and also incredibly hot. But I went with my daughter and on a school trip. It was through her school, and it was really fun, and it was really amazing to be able to travel with her and have that experience with her first time abroad. And so we just had a fantastic time, but I am still really adjusting to being back home, entering into the flow of everyday life and the time change and all of it. So I apologize if I'm tripping over my words more than usual. I already do that all the time, but if I'm doing that more than usual, that is why I am trying to reintegrate into normal life after having a really good time on this trip. So, today we're going to talk about subconscious beliefs and how they impact our lives. And the idea for this episode came from an experience actually that I had, kind of an argument, if you will, that I had with my husband recently. And I thought, well, this would be a really great topic for the show. And a lot of times this is what happens. I experience something in my everyday life, and it makes me think of how that applies in my larger life and how that applies to everyone's lives. And then I bring it to you guys. So I will get into this story between my husband and I. And often, relationships are great mirrors for where we are, where our mind is, where our belief system is, and they can help us grow and they can help us change. Relationships are really designed to do that if we're willing to be open to them. But before I get into all that, I want to remind you to please sign up for my newsletter. This is the place that you can really stay in contact with me between show episodes. It's also a spot where we get intimate. I share a lot of stuff in the newsletter about myself and my life, and how I apply all the concepts that we talk about on the show into my personal life. It's where I will always be letting you know about the newest things that are available. And speaking of which, I am doing another piece, Finding Peace in Turbulent Times workshop. This time I'm doing it live in my local yoga studio, but I am going to have a virtual option. So I will put the link to that in the show notes as well if you would like to attend. That is going to be next Saturday. Let me just double check the date for you. Saturday the 19th. 7/19. So if you're interested in attending locally, if you're in the New Jersey area, then that's great. But if you'd like to attend virtually, that would be beautiful also. But back to the newsletter. So I send it out weekly. It's really an easy way to get a dose of self-reflection and growth and mindfulness. And I know sometimes you might not have time to listen to the podcast every week. A podcast episode is 45 minutes to an hour. Sometimes they're a little over an hour. And with busy schedules, sometimes that feels like a really tall order to be able to listen to an entire podcast. But the newsletters are beautiful. They're packed with so much wisdom and guidance and help. And they'll only take you a couple minutes to read. So you get a lot of bang for your time buck by reading the newsletter, and you also get to stay in contact with me, and we get to communicate back and forth, right? So I love when my listeners and readers email me back. I always respond to any emails I get personally. I don't have my assistant reply to those. So you'll know that if you email me, you will be emailing me directly, and I will be responding to you directly. So sign up for the newsletter and get in the know. All right, now on to our show. Hey, gorgeous souls, and welcome to the Midlife Purpose Project. I'm your host, Katie Farinas, a yoga teacher and soul purpose coach. And just like you, I'm navigating the wild, beautiful, and sometimes messy terrain of midlife. This is the space where we unpack the shifts happening in our bodies, minds, and souls, We're diving deep into the questions that rise up when everything seems to be changing. Think of this as your toolkit for making sense of this powerful phase of life. We'll have honest conversations, belly laughs, maybe a few tears, and a whole lot of growth. We'll hear from experts on topics that matter to you in midlife, and I'll share yogic philosophy that has been helping humans live with more skill and ease for centuries. Because here's the truth. Everything you've been through, every challenge, every joy, every heartbreak, has been training you for this. You're not broken, you're not lost, you're stepping into your power. So come on in, embrace the mess, the beauty, and the absolute magic of midlife. Let's journey together. Okay, now, subconscious beliefs, that's what we're talking about today. You could also call them unconscious beliefs, but they're beliefs that we hold that we have likely adopted at a fairly young age. And we'll get into more of that in a little bit about why and how we adopt them. But they are running in the background of our brains. So we may not even be aware that they exist. But just because we are not aware that they exist doesn't mean that they're not influencing every thought that we have, every word that we speak, every action that we perform, because they're like a filter. They're a filter over our perception, our ability to perceive. And so everything that we think and perceive runs through this filter. And it determines the filter that we're using determines how we see ourselves, how we see other people, how we interact with other people, how we engage in relationships. It really impacts everything in our entire lives, this filter of unconscious beliefs. And so it's really important that we start investigating those unconscious beliefs and deciding if they are working for us and if we feel that we want to hold on to them or if we want to work on removing them and inserting different beliefs in their place. And I came up with the idea of this episode because my husband and I were in a car together and we wound up getting into a little bit of a fight because he's a pretty aggressive driver. And we were driving together one day and there was a woman. He was the driver, I was the passenger, and there was a woman trying to get into our lane. And he was trying to stop her from getting into the lane because he felt that she was trying to basically cut in front of traffic by going around us. And I did not believe that. I actually thought that she got off on the wrong exit, realized it, had to merge back onto the highway so that she could get onto her correct exit. So we had a very different perception of what was happening in that moment. And that different perception was based on exactly what I'm talking about. So here's two people in the same car at the exact same time experiencing the same thing, but perceiving it completely differently. And why is that? Why were we perceiving that situation completely differently? Well, because I'm working off of an assumption that people are good and they sometimes make mistakes and that we should show them grace for those mistakes and allow her to enter, into the lane in front of us. Where my husband's working from a different belief set that people are always trying to get away with things and they are trying to cheat the system and they're trying to kind of basically take advantage of him by cutting in front of us. And so this turned into an argument between the two of us. It was, one of those typical marital spats that I think are, many, many married couples have. And later on, we kind of had a moment, and then later on, we came back to talk about it. And when we talked about it, I told him that one of the concerns I had with what happened was not really about letting the car in front of us or not letting the car in front of us, but about these basic beliefs and how they can actually override really, really important values that we carry. So we might carry a value that's very important to us. But yet, if we have one of these subconscious beliefs running in the background that is in conflict with our values, then we may not be living our value because this subconscious belief takes over and it makes us do things. It makes us say things. It makes us act in certain ways. And given this example of with my husband, I asked him, what is your like basically your life motto? What do you want to put out into the world? What do you want people to say about you one day at your funeral, right? When you people are getting up to talk about you at your funeral. What is the word or words that you want to keep hearing over and over that people are saying that you were what? And he said kindness. Kindness is his value. That's his life motto. That's what he wants to put out into the world. And then he realized that these subconscious beliefs that people are trying to take advantage, get away with things, disrespect him, they were running in the background. And because of that, it overrode that deep value of kindness, right? Because kindness would be, I'm going to assume that you made a mistake and I'm going to let you in front of me instead of getting angry and trying to, basically box her out and not let her get in. And so I thought, well, this is very interesting. We should have an episode on this. So here we are. So I want you to take a moment for yourself and think about we talked about values. We've talked about values a lot on this show and how when we can really identify our values, it really helps us to identify our purpose and what we want to do in this world. But what is your deepest value, your motto for your life? What is the thing that when it's your funeral, you want people saying about you? So just take a moment to think about that. And if you don't know, it's okay. You can think about it later, you can journal on it. But having this kind of life value or motto is really helpful because it can help guide all of our interactions, all of our thoughts, all of our words, all of our, relationships, if we know what that value is. And also, if we know what it is, when we don't live it, because one of these subconscious beliefs gets in our way, there's awareness around that, right? I didn't live into my value. Why didn't I live into my value? Something got in my way. Let's investigate. Let's get curious about what got into my way. Because these subconscious beliefs are literally a filter. And everything we see, think, do, perceive passes through this filter or these filters. So we better get real clear on what our filters are and decide if we want to keep them or if it's time to change out the filter, all right? Remove one and put in something else that serves our values better. So we typically develop these subconscious beliefs at a young age, and they're usually in response to something that happens to us and around us. And in yoga, we call it our conditioning, right? It's our conditioning, and that conditioning in yoga creates something called samskaras. So in modern science, we would call that a neuropathway. A samskara is a neuropathway. So we develop it in response, and we're going to talk about a little more detail about how we develop them, but in response to something that happens to us or around us, we develop a belief and it gets embedded into our brain. And it gets so embedded into our brain, this samskara or neural pathway, that we don't have to think about it. It just fires. So think about, you learned to ride a bike when you were a kid. And at first you had to really think about it and the coordination and the balance and all the things, but you could probably hop on a bike right now and not even think about it and ride the bike. or driving to someplace that you drive to all the time. Maybe it's your job or your kid's school or the supermarket in your area. You could probably have many times arrived at your destination without remembering how you got there, right? Because you have a neuro pathway, and this neuro pathway has been used over and over and over again to the point where it's so embedded in your brain that you don't need to actually consciously think about it. Your brain can do it subconsciously. And that's what we're talking about here, but we're talking about the same thing in relation to your belief system. So it's a belief that you've held for a really long time. It's been reinforced over and over, and you've had it for so long and it's been reinforced so many times that it's not conscious anymore. It's below your conscious awareness. It just runs in the background. Okay. So when we talk about a filter, again, just using like an everyday example, let's say you placed, well, we all know filters from our photographs, right? If you have an iPhone or maybe any other type of smartphone, that you can take a picture and then you can place all these different filters on top of it to change the way that the picture looks, right? So there's the actual picture, the way that you took it, and then you can see it in all these different ways depending on which filter you place on top of that picture. Well, that's what we're talking about here. So two people having the same experience, that experience may appear completely different to each one of those people because they have a different filter. And that filter may work for you or it may not. And that's the question, right? So some scars aren't always bad. Neural pathways are not always bad, right? Neural pathways can benefit in us in our lives, but there are ones that don't. And so this is an investigation into the ones that don't benefit us and what they are, where they came from, and how we can release them and replace them with something that is more beneficial to us. So let's talk about the different ways we get them. As I mentioned, early childhood is really, really common. 0 to 7, the ages of 0 to 7 are very impressionable. Our brains are mostly in a theta state, brainwave state, and those states are very open and very receptive. And that's a beautiful thing, but they're also open and receptive to things that are that don't feel good, feel unsafe, that tell us that we're not okay, that tell us that we're not enough, right? So we're really open and receptive to these things as well in early childhood. So we often get these subconscious beliefs from our parents, caregivers, teachers. We can get them from watching, any form of media, culture. So think about yourself. If you can take yourself back to your early childhood, what messages did you receive? What messages did you receive that maybe aren't serving you right now in your life? So these are things like maybe you were told you were too loud, or you were too hyper, or you were too emotional. Maybe you were told you were too clumsy, or not good at something, right? So what are some of those beliefs for you? And everyone is different in their assimilation of these experiences. So it's not just having the experience, it's how you interpret the experience. So it's having the experience plus your interpretation of the experience, and that equates to your internal story. So think about those things. Were you told that success equaled approval? Or that people who are different should be feared? Were you taught to not trust others? Were you taught to not trust yourself, to not follow your own intuition? Were you taught that you have to be good, agreeable, quiet, pretty in order to feel accepted and loved? These are all very common early childhood beliefs that we pick up and they become subconscious. And repetition, like I mentioned, it's a neural pathway. So the more we hear these things, the more that we think them ourselves, the more that we experience things that confirm or we think confirms that quote unquote truth, the stronger the pathway becomes. So maybe you were not a great student. Here's another really common example I see in people. Maybe you were really not a great student in school. You know, you didn't get high marks. Maybe your test scores weren't great, and you constantly compared yourself to the students around you. Well, that would really set you up for some subconscious beliefs about not being smart, not being capable, and not being able to achieve, right? So there's an experience that you had, and your interpretation of it was that basically you are not as good as others. The other thing about these unconscious beliefs is that when they are paired with a really emotional experience, they get much stickier. So we can maybe have an experience and it doesn't form a subconscious belief because there wasn't a charged emotion around it. So maybe if we hear it over and over and it's really repetitive, then it becomes a belief. But we can experience something just one time, and if it's paired with a really strong emotion, then that gets embedded much more easily in our brain. So an example of this would maybe having an experience of getting bullied as a child. Maybe you had an experience where someone was just out to get you for whatever reason. And of course, that's a really emotionally charged situation. You may have felt scared. You may have felt like you needed to protect yourself or that no one was there to help you, very lonely, very vulnerable. These are all really charged emotions. And so maybe this only happened one time, but it was so emotionally charged that it formed that strong neural pathway. And now you walk through the world with this unconscious belief that you can't let others see the real you, right? Or else they won't love and accept you, or that the real you is unworthy, or that you have to protect yourself from everyone to be safe. You don't let anybody in, or you assume the worst of people, right? You just assume that people are not good and that people, are selfish and hurtful, right? These are all unconscious beliefs that you may develop if you have a really emotionally charged situation. Another common one, especially for women, is hearing the same thing over and over from an authority figure in their lives about their bodies. So if you've heard your mom or your grandmother, or your aunt or your big sister saying things like, "I'm so fat," and you hear this over and over, you may develop body shame. You may develop unhealthy relationships with food or with your own body, right? So these things show up in different ways, but they all stem from the same experience. Money is another really big one, and I myself have struggled with this. I grew up in a working class family. My parents both worked really hard, but my dad lost his job when I was very young, and he couldn't get another job for an entire year, and they went through their entire savings account, and they almost lost their home, and it was a very scary situation for them. And as a result, it really emotionally scarred them, right? So they had this very scary, very emotional experience, and it absolutely scarred their psyche. And so for my entire childhood, money was really associated with scarcity. There was never enough. There was always a risk of losing it. We always had to make sure that we saved everything because you never knew what was going to happen. And then what if we didn't have enough money? It was all very, very, very much based in scarcity. So this is what I grew up with. This when my father lost his job and they had this experience, I was a toddler. So essentially my entire life, I heard stories about how they almost lost their home and how important it is to save your money and how you can't, you can't spend on anything that's not a necessity because you have to save it because you might need it one day and all of these stories. And so to this day, I really struggle with abundance when it comes to financial abundance and feeling that it's okay to spend money and that money will come to me, right? That to trusting that I will have enough money. And we are financially secure and there is no logical reason for me to fear not having enough money or to believe that I am not worthy of financial abundance. But I know that I have this subconscious belief running in the background. It's not so subconscious now. I am aware of it. And I'm working on removing it. But neural pathways are, they are, they're deeply embedded. And so it takes time. And what can happen is we can choose to replace a new neural pathway or a new samskara with the old one, or allow the old one to weaken and die off. So yoga is both a science and a system. It's a system for liberation, and it's done through a scientific method. And liberating ourselves from the conditioning that isn't serving us is the whole point of yoga. It leads us to moksha or freedom, liberation, where we aren't held back by these unconscious beliefs and programs. And they also, when we remove them, it allows us, as I said at the beginning of the show, to actually live the values that we say are so important to us, right? So there's two things here. Do we want to draw certain things into our lives and our limiting beliefs stopping that? So in my example, would I like to, manifest more money into my life? Yes, I would. But my limiting beliefs around money are blocking that. And in order for me to do that, I need to work on weakening that neural pathway, that belief that there is never enough, that scarcity belief, and replace it with an abundance mindset and an abundance belief. And for example, going back to my husband, if his core value is kindness, if that's what he wants to put out into the world, then subconscious beliefs that people are not good and that people are just trying to take advantage or get one over on him, he needs to work on removing those core beliefs and replacing them with core beliefs that people are good and that we are all one, and that by, putting good energy out into the world, it not only impacts the other person, but it actually impacts him. And that he doesn't need to protect himself from others, that he is already safe and already whole and perfect just as he is, right? So these are the things that we need to work on in order to live the value. So let's do a little internal family system meditation to try to identify what's holding you back and what core beliefs or subconscious beliefs maybe need to be replaced with something else. There's a Yogi Raj Akela, who says, "What are you not seeing because you are seeing what you are seeing?" And I love that quote because when we start to see the filter, when we start to become aware of the filter through which we are perceiving our lives, we start to realize that there's so much that we're not seeing because we're only seeing through that filter, and that filter is not reality. It can be changed, just like you take a picture on your phone and you can have that, you can place, I don't know how many filters are on the iPhone, many filters over that phone, over that picture, and see that picture in many different ways, right? We can do that in our lives. There's not only one filter through which we can view life. And when we start to realize that and realize that we have the power to change the filter, just like we can choose which filter we want to put over our picture that we take, we can choose which filter we want to see the world through. That's a choice that we have, and that is power and that is freedom. So let's try that a little bit. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to say is Jim Fortin, if you've ever heard of him, he has the be, do, have method, and you can look him up. I love his concept on this, but basically we think in order to have what we want in our lives, whether that be relationships, love, money, success, fulfillment, purpose, that we have to do. There's all this doing that has to be done in order to have the thing we want. But he reminds us that first we have to be. So we have to be with ourselves, be with that conditioning, recognize it, become aware of it, and shift it as needed. And then we can move, right? Then we can move from that place. Then we can do the doing. And then the doing will lead to the having. But if we want love in our lives, but we are constantly doing things to push love away because we have some unconscious belief that we are not worthy of that love, then no matter what we do, we will never get the love, because everything we do is being done through this filter of I'm not worthy. So let's think about some things, some beliefs that could be blocking you from living into, the things that you desire. So common ones would be weight loss, right? A lot of people struggle with weight loss. Money, as I've mentioned, wanting more money. Quality relationships, having like good, meaningful, solid relationships that you feel that you can be 100% yourself. You feel that you completely trust the other person. Meaningful work, right? Work that really feels aligned with who you are and with your soul and with your purpose. These are common things that people struggle with in their lives. And so when we're looking for an unconscious belief that we may want to extract, right, and replace with a different filter, it is helpful to look to something in your life that you have tried to change repeatedly without success. So maybe you've tried to have a good relationship, it hasn't worked out. You've tried to lose weight, it hasn't worked out. You've tried to find meaning and purpose through work, it hasn't worked out. Likely, there is a core belief there that is holding you back. Remember the be, do, have, right? You've tried. You've done all the doing, but you haven't gotten the have. You haven't gotten it because you haven't extracted this core belief, the being part. So just take a moment and think about something in your life maybe that is like that for you, right? Something that has showed up repeatedly, something you really desire, something you've tried to change or tried to get, but without success. Now, hold that belief in your mind's eye And just if you're not driving, if you're somewhere safe, just close your eyes and place your hand on your heart and take a few deep breaths. Just nice, slow, deep breaths in and out. We're just getting comfortable with ourselves in this moment, getting in touch with our higher selves. And now ask yourself and ask the belief if it's okay to check in with it, to get to know it better. And if you immediately get a no response, and that could be hearing the word no, or it could be feeling resistance in your body, then it's okay. You can just open your eyes and continue on with your day. But if it feels okay to investigate this core belief, you could ask it, how old is it? Does it live somewhere in your body? Where do you think it came from? Do any images or stories come to mind when you focus on the belief? How long has it been around? Just sit with yourself in a state of curiosity and see what comes through. Offer the belief some compassion, right? Because these beliefs were formed to protect you. That's why you have them. Because at one point you thought you needed them in order to be safe. Inhale and exhale gently. And then ask the belief, what do you need? And just listen. Allow whatever comes through to be enough. There's no need to force or strain. Just let the belief whisper to you, or even remain silent. Just sit with it and let that be enough. Take a moment to see how you feel. When we get in touch with these core beliefs, and we offer them compassion, and we give them space to share with us where they came from and why they formed, we're getting in touch with our higher selves. And so you may feel calmer, more connected, more confident, courageous, more clear or compassionate. These are all signs that you've contacted your higher self. Now let it all go. Just rest in your breath for a few minutes. When you feel ready, you can open your eyes, maybe taking note of anything that surfaced, any images, thoughts, words, sensations, and even taking a moment to write them down. You can journal on them, or maybe come back and just reflect on them later. The thing about these unconscious beliefs is that they lose their stickiness when we turn towards them and get curious about them and show them that compassion and understanding and love. That's when they release their grip, when they feel seen and heard and understood. And when we quiet our minds and observe our conditioned thoughts, we can choose responses that are aligned with our Dharma, with our soul purpose, with that life motto, rather than allowing that conditioning to control us. So the next time you recognize that maybe you behaved in a way that was out of alignment for what you truly believe in your heart, maybe come back to this. Think about what core belief, what subconscious belief must have been running in the background to make you say the thing you said, do the thing you did, or even think the thought that you thought. And then spend some time with it. Spend some time with that unconscious belief that may have risen to the surface, to your consciousness. Figure out where it came from, why it's there, and if it's time to change the filter. All right, friends, I hope that was helpful in understanding yourself a little bit better and maybe why you are the way you are, or do the things that you do, but also why you maybe don't have some of the things in your life that you are seeking and what's blocking you from getting them. Don't forget, sign up for the newsletter. I will put the link in the show notes, and I will also put the link for the Finding Peace in Turbulent Times workshop, which will be in a week and a half, 10 days from now. You can sign up all the way till the day of the workshop. So you have time, but get on it now before you forget, because that's what I would do. Okay. Have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you for joining me on this journey of self-discovery here at the Midlife Purpose Project. I hope today's conversation sparked something deep inside of you, made you laugh, or reminded you that you are never alone. Remember, it's never too late to reconnect with your soul's purpose and live a life of meaning. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the show, or share it with someone who could use a little inspiration. It really helps the show reach more women and helps me keep the content ad-free. Join me next time as we continue to explore what it means to live with purpose in midlife.